Hey, how's everybody doing? We are kicking off a brand new study on the book of Galatians. And today I just wanted to give you a little introduction to the book of Galatians so that as we jump into it on Sunday, you're ready to go. All right, so the book of Galatians, who's it written by? The Apostle Paul. He wrote this letter to the churches in Galatia. So where is Galatia? What is Galatia? There's a couple different ideas with it. Both of them are really there in the modern day Turkey area. So one of them is kind of an ethnic group. One is a region. As we look at timing and things like that, it seems to be written to this ethnic group. That the reason they get this name Galatia is they are from Gaul originally, which is kind of the area of France. They invaded that area, took over several hundred years before the writing of this, and live in this region, the region of Galatia. Paul planted some churches in this area, most likely on his first and second missionary journeys, and is now writing back to give them some further instruction. The timing of this is kind of hinging. There's two different times depending on some of the events that he's referring to here. So the position that I take here, kind of based on some writing here, is that it took place before the Jerusalem Council found in Acts 15. So this is an important moment in early church history. It's where Paul comes down and has this big council with the apostles there in Jerusalem to really settle the issue of what are we requiring of our Gentile believers? What are the next steps? What do they need to do? We know that it's by faith alone, grace alone, but there's people talking about circumcision and following Jewish customs and culture, and where does this stop? Like these non-Jewish people, it's not a requirement to become Jewish to be a follower of Jesus. So they settled that issue. We see some of these issues are brought up in the book of Galatians, the letter to Galatians. My position is that if this had happened after the Jerusalem Council, then they'd have referred to it here in the book of Galatians, which means, from my perspective, that it was written before that. There were two meetings in Jerusalem about this in the book of Acts. This took place after the first one, as Paul talks about taking Titus down there for that initial conversation. Which means that it was written in about 48, 49 BC. This means this is one of the earliest books in the New Testament. So this is just this very first new generation of Christians. And what Paul is doing is he's settling some of these, or working to settle some of these issues of false doctrine reaching into the church, really around the area of legalism. I mentioned before, it's the issue of cultural and religious Judaism making its way into early Christianity. For obvious reasons, because everyone before they became Christians up to this point were Jewish. They had gone to the temple, they had celebrated the Passover and all these religious festivals, they were circumcised, they had these dietary laws they were following, and now the completion, the fulfillment is that Jesus is the Messiah, the one they have been waiting for, praying for. So now salvation is through him. But do we stop doing these other things? And their interpretation is like, no, we don't stop doing these things. Yes, it's Jesus alone, faith alone, grace alone, and in him. But we also continue these traditions. Not an issue until people that had no history of this came into the faith. And do these people need to follow it? And this is what Paul's addressing in the first part of this letter. He's like, you've picked up a false gospel. You're adding things to Jesus. It's now Jesus plus other things. You're adding works to your salvation, which is not the gospel of Jesus. Paul makes a case for this in the book of Galatians, and he really starts off, and we're going to find the first couple of days here, by establishing his authority as an apostle. That I was called by Jesus. I was mentored. I was taught through the Holy Spirit. That yes, I come from a different branch. Like I wasn't part of the 12. I didn't follow Jesus during his pre-resurrection Jesus. But Jesus did appear to me. And I do have authority to speak on these things. He then goes to the salvation message, and he goes back and talks about the Old Testament. That it's always been present there. The message of salvation, and draw these connections to it. And then finally ends up this letter by talking about the role of the Holy Spirit. And it's in this part we get some of these famous passages that we go back to a lot that talk about the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. What's the result of God working in us and through us? So as we look at Galatians, it's written for a specific purpose to address this heresy, this false teaching in the church that is adding good deeds, that's adding tradition, that's adding our behavior on the gospel. It's Jesus plus these other things. And Paul's saying, no, it's Jesus plus nothing. And that's the theme of it. And we're going to hear all of these other things along the way. So look forward to you joining us as we jump into the book of Galatians. We're going to take a couple weeks going through it. It's a relatively short book, but probably not as dense as James, but in that same vein, you know, a lot to cover. The words are, the verses are dense with application. So we're going to take our time walking through this and love for you to join us as we start this Sunday on the Daily Race, walking through the book of Galatians.